to welcome everybody to the Daily Cheat Sheet here with the dude. Golan is still somewhere. Have any idea where he is?
No idea. He's on a river somewhere in Barcelona, floating on the river. He's going very fast. I'm sure he's having a great time.
If we don't hear from him, we'll send, by Saturday we will send out a dinghy. And I want to welcome everybody. And you got to have a few laughs these days. Sometimes you really do. I want to remind everybody that you can download the show. When you do, please subscribe, follow, give us the 5 stars, give us those ratings, reviews. It really is helpful. Mend, this morning I was in the middle of writing a post. I didn't post it yet. And I was thinking to myself, I've shared on the show before that I'm sober 27, coming up on 27 years, but we've known many people that have drug and alcohol problems, mental health issues. And all I could think to myself was, thank God I wasn't born in the 1940s or earlier, in the sense that that's when lobotomies really started to become very popular. Right? Are you familiar with lobotomies?
Oh, yeah. It's the modern day trans surgery is what they were doing back then with lobotomies. They thought that was helping kids by drilling out part of their brain. They would go in through the eyeball and drill up into the brain. And they thought that somehow that was helping people. I think one of the Kennedys got a lobotomy.
Yeah, Rose Kennedy did. It's interesting. Well, obviously, but I think that's Bobby's aunt. It's interesting, though, because when you look at the numbers, they're almost exactly identical time-wise with the amount of numbers. So obviously this sex change stuff has been around for quite a while. But in a 4-year period from 2016 to 2020, 50,000 were performed in the United States.
Lobotomies?
No, those are banned. Sex change operations.
Okay, yeah, I thought you said 1940s.
No. From 2016, no. But in the late 40s to like early 1952, before then it was more fringe, and it was created by a guy named Walter Freeman. So you could still go to their site, and they cite articles saying how good the work was, even though everybody has said this is bunk science, fringe science. And he performed 3,500 of them, 3,500 of these surgeries. And I say I'm so blessed because how many people that are struggling with addiction, if they were gay or thought differently and went into somebody's office, the easiest solution was, well, let's just take a chunk out of your brain.
Yeah, it's look, we've seen the science get it wrong in the past, and clearly we're seeing it real time now where they are getting it wrong. If there's a little girl who thinks she's a boy, we call them tomboys. And they would roughhouse with the boys, and then they grow up to be, as Danny yesterday pointed out, they grow up to be beautiful, fine women, and they grow out of that stage. You let the kids go through their changes. I thought I was an astronaut, and I also thought I was Superman when I was a kid, but you weren't going to let me jump off a building.
There was always that one story, though, of the kid jumping off the slide in every neighborhood across America and them having to shut down the big slide. But obviously, we're both on the same page as this, and I'm glad you actually knew about it and brought that up, the correlation, because that's exactly where I was going. But again, to the point, it's like, how are we allowing this bunk and fringe science? And I'm very happy that Bobby Kennedy this morning was on Fox and Friends and was talking about he's going to be looking into this, into the medications, especially SSRIs and all these medications and the dangers of them. Because the question I have, and again, we don't know, is, and we brought this up yesterday, is telehealth. You cannot be prescribing these horrific medications, even if it's not the case with this person, this Robert, who everybody is calling Robin, most papers. I'm not sure that's how they were being treated, and we have no evidence, and he brought that up. But he's going to investigate this because we do not know. We are tampering with children's brains.
Yeah, there's, this the latest trans school shooter, because the last 7 school shootings have been committed by trans.
It's 7 or 5? Are you sure it's 7? Just for,
I think it's 7. I listed about 6 yesterday. I could find it again, but this is the latest in a long string of trans identifying people shooting up schools. And more recently, it's been Catholic and Christian schools because they are just anti-God and anti-religion. And they let out their ire on these tiny little innocent kids. These kids did absolutely nothing wrong. They were little children. And this guy, I watched his video that he recorded before he posted on social media a video before he went on this rampage, and he is pure evil. He is talking about killing little kids, talking about where's your God now, like all this demonic stuff, denying Holocaust, hating Trump, all that other stuff. But the way he talks about killing children is just horrific. And where were his parents? Where were his friends? Where was his psychiatrist and psychologist? There had to be people around that knew how unstable this guy was. I think they want to relist transgenderism as a mental illness, which will then prevent them from getting guns. I think that's a great move. I mean, if you don't know whether or not you're a male or female, clearly that's a mental illness. You should be treated for that. You should get help. And there's a lot of good help out there for that. But you should not own guns, especially when these guys have a track record of shooting up schools. So I hope they do move forward with that. And I hope people like him do get help before they go and commit these atrocities.
Yeah, listen, 100%. And not just, obviously, we're witnessing the schools, another scientific experiment with with rape, assaults. And this is the thing. People are going to always rebut this, right? It's the same thing with illegal immigrants, right? And they're going to say, well, before this, almost all the school shooters were white. Yeah, we're white men. I get that. There's no... you're 100% correct, but we're seeing a trend, and it's a big trend that's going on right now. So to equate the two is extremely unfair. Yeah, of course, we murder each other in this country. We don't need to add that on by bringing illegal aliens into this country to add to the job. The same way we don't need to be adding to this murder spree. But I mean, and I don't really think people realize, because, men, as you've brought up many times, the pharmaceutical industry is very powerful. Obviously, they make a lot of money off this, and they are making a ton of money off hormone blockers and all these things. There's literally no doubt about it. But the side effects, as Bobby Kennedy was talking about, like calling it like a black box of like just the dangers of these drugs that have been given out that nobody really knows. There's no long-term studies on these things. So until you have something like that, maybe it's a little too early to start giving it to people.
The one thing they're not doing after these school shootings, either a toxicology report or their medical history to see what they were on. We're finding out drips and drabs that a lot of these kids were on SSRIs because they have body dysmorphia and they don't know what sexuality they are. This is a drug problem. This is a mental illness problem. This is a mental institution problem. This is not a gun problem. If this was a gun problem, you'd see a lot of legal gun owners committing crimes. What we're seeing is a lot of illegal gun owners commit crimes. We're seeing a lot of people with mental illnesses get guns and then commit crimes. But you don't see, I forgot how many guns there are in America. I think it's like 2 guns for every person. So say like 600 million, say 500 million guns. The overwhelming mass majority, by leaps and bounds, 99% of gun owners are law-abiding citizens. They have it either for hunting or protecting their families. It's the ones that commit crimes that are using illegal guns. It's the ones that are committing crimes that are mentally ill and should not have guns. So there are fixes. It's just not any that the elected officials are proposing, especially those on the left. The ones on the left are calling this a gun problem and they want to ban more guns. When you take some of the, we talked about this yesterday, the biggest, strictest gun cities in America, like Chicago, with the most restrictive gun laws, have the most gun crimes. Do you know why that is? Because legal residents can't get guns in those states. So the only ones with guns are the criminals, and they are running and wreaking havoc across the city. That's the way it's going in places like Chicago. So enacting more gun laws and you don't enforce the existing laws doesn't do anything.
Again, but again, even to your point, this isn't about guns. It's about places like Minnesota who are coming out and have been so pro the trans advocacy. There's no it's like I love that PBS is like, and this is why we got to get rid of PBS, is like questioning the motive. Like, what was the motive behind it? He said the motive. He
Yeah.
said exactly what the motive was. I'm going to trust him before he died that everything he wrote down in his head was the truth. So it's not even about guns. People will figure out a way to commit atrocities with guns, minus guns. This has nothing to do with the guns. This has to do with, and now they're all trying to sort of run away from this thing. But it's such morbid thinking, and also Tim Walz. This is being reported that he shut down school safety, more guards within the
Well,
within the budget.
this is what happened is that there was a school shooting 3 years ago, Covenant Christian School, which was carried out by a trans-identified shooter as well. The heads of numerous Catholic and independent schools across Minnesota sent a letter to Tim Walz pleading for additional security at their schools. He did not give them any kind of additional security. What he did was he declared that Minnesota is a trans sanctuary state. You have the lieutenant governor at that signing. When he was signing that bill, she was wearing a t-shirt that said "Protect Trans Kids" with a giant knife on it. It's almost like the Islamic Caliphate sword. That's what it reminded me of. So these people don't care about their citizens' kids. They don't care about, or their actions show that, or their actions cause harm to their citizens. I don't know what they care about. My wife eloquently pointed this out the other day. You don't know what they care about. You don't know what they're thinking, but you do know what their actions and what the cause effect from their actions are. The effect of their actions is that innocent kids are less safe. The effect of their actions are that there is not more security outside their schools, even after their schools were attacked. I think it was 2013, but I'm not sure on the date, but it was Covenant Christian School in Minnesota that was attacked. They asked for more security and they got none. What they got was their governor declared it a trans sanctuary state, and the lieutenant governor was there with a threatening t-shirt that said "Protect Trans Rights" with a sword on it or a knife. So you're seeing the results of that.
Listen, I think you're 100% correct. And again, but I want to go back to this mental health issue. And this is something that has to be confronted to people on the left who suffer, I believe, from a lot of mental illness in itself, which is why they're projecting it onto other people. But if somebody walks in, we really, and Bobby Kennedy really needs to take a look at this too, is the psychiatrist in America. We really need to take a look at, listen, we live in California, and the number of women, the 70%, 76% of all psychologists are women. And I would venture to say 100% of those, especially in Los Angeles, are on the left. Okay. We really need to look at licensing. We need to look at education, and we need to look at what they're sending out. Because this is one of those areas we could actually, with somebody like Bobby Kennedy, get control of again. We've lost the universities, but these people need to retake tests, because something is really off. If you're going to tell me there were 50,000 surgeries from 2016 to 2020, which is so far beyond any numbers beforehand, something is wrong. Somebody is being given bad data. Somebody is, whoever's getting these,
they should take away the medical licenses from doctors who perform gender mutilation surgeries on minors. Period. End of story. It does not help the child at all. There is no scientific data that proves that this does anything. And the only thing it does do is it permanently alters his child's trajectory in life. So if you want to do nothing and wait later on, so you give the kid emotional support, you get him mental help, you try every way you can to make this kid fit in, wear whatever dress you want, who cares? But no surgeries. And any doctor that commits this type of surgery should have their medical license revoked. Period.
No, but it's even more than that. This isn't. Listen, this isn't like.
I know what you're saying. This is what Danny was talking about yesterday. That book that he talked about that all psychiatrists use and all of that stuff. Yes, it is entrenched. We're talking about the ideological subversion that the Democrats have been using, which is a Soviet plan that's been in play for 60 years or since the 1960s. They're going along with that. They are destroying the fabric of our society and trying to destroy America. And this is a Soviet plan. We get that. But if you want to start tackling some of the low-hanging fruit Number one, revoke the medical licenses of any doctor that performed a transition surgery. Start with that. And then you can move on to the psychiatrist and the psychologist and all these other people that are pushing this insane nonsense. You remember there was a whole thing of recovering traumatic memories. This was a big thing, I think, in the 80s or 90s, where someone would go to a psychiatrist and the psychiatrist would help them remember things that they couldn't remember. And all these kids were coming out and saying, oh, I was molested by my teacher,
Right.
by my priest, by my dad. And in the end, there was about 6 months of this hysteria where people were going through it and psychiatrists were helping and psychologists were helping people recover these memories. And then it came out that it was all bunk science and was them putting the ideas into susceptible people's minds. None of that stuff actually happened. It was the psychiatrist leading the patient to a conclusion of an event that never actually transpired. We're having the same thing here. You have these psychiatrists and psychologists and doctors and experts and all of that are leading these kids down a path to a conclusion that is irreversible. So, in 20 years from now, you're going to have a whole bunch of these 6-year-olds that are now 26-year-olds, and they're going to be pissed. There's going to be a massive movement, but we don't have 20 years to wait.
That's exactly, though, what I was writing about this morning. Was I was saying, like, I'm blessed, right? Like, I'm blessed that I was able to get through it, my alcoholism, my addiction. Had I not, and I've been around in the 40s, I probably would have been given a lobotomy. Mm-hmm. And I probably would have been, and I sort of would have been okay with it because it was the easier way out. It's like feel nothing, know nothing, or have to face life. And that's one of the hardest things people have to do. And we've taken that away from people. We've taken away from people facing life, facing reality with all these drugs, not just with trans, with so many drugs that are being ingested into people's system, psychotropic drugs. It's like reality is something that doesn't like to be ignored. Eventually, you're going to have to face it. And I'm blessed that 27 years later, my brain is still functioning, me a little less, but it's still functioning. And nothing was done that's irreparable. All these things, irreparable. You cannot repair, obviously, the trans stuff. You cannot repair the drugs that have what they've done to the brain. You cannot repair it. And this is really where I wish Republicans would focus on. And that's why I'm talking about this so much, is because everybody loves to go into their two separate corners without ever really focusing on this, what we're talking about, as you refer to some of it as being the low-hanging fruit, but going after the doctors, going after the surgeons, not recognizing them. And I'll just finish with this. In 1950, the Soviet Union banned lobotomies, okay? Their doctors saw, and we kept on going. No different than the trans stuff. We kept on going, I think, into the 70s, a little bit less, but we went into the 70s with this. While Russia banned it, MEND, because they saw no good from it. So, it's a very scary thing. I want to move on a little bit to, this is a story that just got my interest, and I'm very happy Republicans are doing this, is they're going after Wikipedia. And I think it's Luna from Florida that's doing it. She's the congresswoman that always wears the suit. And they're going after Wikipedia for all the false information that's being spread in it. And this is like one of those things that is an extremely dangerous thing, just like Google is in many ways, right? Because so many people cite Wikipedia as their sources. I mean, and I don't blame them in a sense, because everybody uses Wikipedia. But at the same time, MEND, there is so much hatred towards Jews in there, hatred to Christianity in there, hatred towards all religions. You could pretty much write and edit whatever you want in there, and it could be complete falsehoods.
Well, the Wikipedia problem is that they have been infested with activists from all different causes. So I'm not an editor on Wikipedia because I don't have the time and I don't care what's going on that site. But there's a lot of people that have realized, especially nefarious actors, that they could become editors. They then create a cabal, a little group of them, and they reinforce each other. And they're pushing through insane stuff, anti-American stuff, anti-democracy, anti-capitalism, anti-Israel, of course. That just goes without saying. So I hope they get somewhere with Wikimedia. That's the parent name of the company. I think it's a nonprofit. They should remove their nonprofit status, and they should severely curtail what countries, what IP addresses, what locations editors are allowed to log in from and get some sort of verification as to who these people are, maybe even do the background check on them to see where their alliances are. If you have known terrorists contributing, that's a problem. So good for them for going after it. I mean, we talked about the
And by the way, let
Smithsonian.
me just correct myself. It's James Comer and Nancy Mace. So got them
Right.
confused. So that's who's doing the investigation. So I really do hope they actually. I don't. Can I ask you a question? Before, and I'm sorry for interrupting you. I got to ask you this question.
What's up?
They're investigating Wikimedia, as you call it, right? That's the parent company. What exactly? How long should an investigation like
Yeah,
that
it shouldn't
take?
have, I mean, it doesn't have to go on that long. That stuff is all over the place. So I'm sure there are lists out there. I've seen them where you could see all the examples of just insane stuff that's posted into Wikipedia as if it's fact. So, and people cite it as sources. And there's a lot of places like schools. If you want a school paper, they want you to cite Wikipedia. They list it as a trusted source when it is in fact not a trusted source. So it reminds me of two things. One is democracy is not always good. There was a democracy in Gaza and they elected Hamas. So democracy does not work for everybody. And the same thing works with Wikipedia. You would think that if you democratized information and allowed everybody to just put up information as if it's fact into Wikipedia, somehow it's all going to balance out. But we know there's a ridiculous amount of radicals with a lot of time on their hands, and they just spend time spewing misinformation to try to help their goals, their aspirations for whatever that is. So that's number one. It also reminds me of what's been happening at the Smithsonian, where that place was infested with people that had an agenda. And, you see the news outlets attacking Trump over his efforts to clean up the Smithsonian. But there are a couple of facts that they had in the Smithsonian that just don't align with our country. One of them is the way Reagan's presidency was summed up in 5 sentences. And I'll read you the last one was Reagan unapologetically reduced social welfare programs, which is not actually true, unless you count things like student loan and so on. But he didn't reduce welfare programs. It does not mention that Reagan ended the Cold War. They talk about the ending of the Cold War.
Who do they attribute it to? Bush?
No, they talk about the Soviet Union's collapse, the end of the Cold War, but they basically make it sound like it just took place on its own. And Reagan just happened to be president at the time. They don't attribute it to Reagan, the guy who said to Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
I was going to say, if they actually said it was Bush,
So you're talking about, these are the institutions that are supposed to inspire future generations about American greatness and what we've achieved and what we can achieve. This is the greatest nation on earth in the history of mankind. This is the greatest nation. This is the greatest experiment, and it worked. And the institutions that are supposed to highlight that are not. And we're not saying that you can't have an exhibit on, say, slavery, which ironically is named after the Slavs, which is a white people, because they were the most enslaved people, mostly by African Moors. But let's not even talk about that. Just painting everything with that lens of slavery or America as the bad guy is just it's morally wrong, but it's also factually incorrect. So
listen, but there's a great story, but you're going down the list. It's Ashley Babbitt. The Air Force granted her full military honors to Ashley Babbitt after military leadership under Biden was rejected it. Now, remember, this is another thing that is so much of the lie of January 6th, where she was the only one murdered that day. She was the only
Ashley Babbitt was the only person murdered on January 6th, and she was a protester and an Air Force veteran, and she was shot by a Capitol Police officer in the chest.
But how long have we had to listen to lies of 6 people dying that day? 6 police officers, this and that. I mean, real lies. And I bet you if you went to Wikipedia, you'd probably see that there too.
You probably would. It reminds me of great point I heard from this guy named Robbie Substack. So Robbie Substack is the one that's been pointing out all these woke corporations, and he holds them to task. He'll send them a letter and say, "Hey, we see that you have this discriminatory program in your hiring practices. You're doing some sort of DEI thing and discriminating against such and such group, or you have some weird pride alliance that this does not align with your customer values. So would you like to respond?" And most of the times, the companies are folding, from Target to I forgot some of the other giant corporations, but like we're talking about huge corporations that Robbie Substack has single-handedly gotten them to change their ways, because he has a huge following on social media, especially X. And when he threatens a company that I'm going to expose you and your practices, Tractor Supply was another one, a farming company that was as woke as they came. And so when he reaches out to them, they change ways. And he mentioned this. He goes, there's an understanding in Hollywood that the more you expose somebody to something, the law of mere exposure effect is that they will become more likely to either support it or at the very least accept it as normal. I tried to say it the other day about the Overton window, the things that the Democrats push, that is just
Well, it's
insane. Like
Goebbels. I mean,
not
that's
being
really
able to, right, they're not able to identify what a woman is. And I was like, these things are so crazy. And what they're doing is they're constantly broadening the public's exposure to it. But I didn't say it as eloquently as Robbie did just there. That law, that the more you are exposed to something, the more you're likely to either support it or at least accept it as normal. And that's what they're doing. That is what they're doing over and over and over again. They push out the most insane thing. And 4 years later, like when Bernie first started talking about his stuff with everything, the oligarchy that he's been talking about for 50 years, the guy's a millionaire himself now. He's not giving up his money. You don't see him giving away all of his money, but he's been talking about that for so many years. It's because years ago he got laughed at, and now he became a national candidate. That law in effect. There it is. It's a clear example of an insane idea like a Bernie Sanders becoming socially accepted over, say, 15, 20 years. That's how it works. And that's
listen.
what they're doing.
I think that's a great point and a great analogy.
But you know
Uh,
who does not do that? So the Republicans don't do that. The conservatives don't do that.
let me explain to you something, because this is the vicious cycle of life. And what we talk about and what we brought up yesterday or the day before, where you have to be very careful with things because eventually it turns. So I'll point you to the 1980s, where a lot of these were very Christian Republican issues, going after canceling TV shows, canceling music. Well, that was Tipper Gore, but it was all, there was so much of this stuff, especially in the 80s, really vitriol coming from the Republican Party. And I've often said it's like they became, and I say they became everything they've hated. They became, as the Republican movement progressed, as people in the party progressed, they regressed, or they became who they hated. So everything they screamed about, they're doing it themselves. So we've actually done this in the past, and it failed. It failed us. It failed us miserably, and it's failing them miserably right now, because it's not working. When you have Snoop Dogg coming out of a movie saying, I didn't go to that movie for, to be indoctrinated by LGBTQ. I just wanted to take my kids to a movie and not be indoctrinated. They're losing. They're not winning this war.
Yeah. And I was going to say that is that the Republicans, the ones that I follow, and I'm not talking about some crazies, the ones that I look up to and follow, they're always very measured, and they're very polite and open to listening to the ideas of the other side. And then they make a counter argument as to their ideas. And none of it comes from a place of hate. It's never coming from, a demonization of the other side. It's usually them laying out a case that makes more sense, that is more logical, that you could follow and sign on to. On the other side, you have people calling, the president of the country a Nazi. I mean, they go crazy. So I think that there's a flaw in the Republican stance, although I think it's the right one. But I think there's a flaw in that. And that is that if you're not a big enough bully like the left is, you tend to lose out a lot. You tend to lose out a lot when you're trying to be the sane side, this rational side, when the other side claims to be rational, but
Or
they're
claims the
absolutely
moral high
irrational.
ground.
Yeah, they're exactly.
I listen. I agree with you, but again, I go back to there was quite a time where Republicans had their day in the puritanical sun, and it's
Great. I'm glad it's passed. I'm glad it's over.
I'm glad it's over. But my point is, they've taken over the mantle and then some.
All I'm
They,
saying is that they're being a little too nice. I'm
yeah.
saying that they
Oh
are
no.
being a
Yeah.
little bit
No.
too
I
nice.
listen. This is something. I agree with you. This is something I talk about every time, every day. That Republicans don't do this enough. I agree with you on that 100%. Push back, speak up, and hopefully going against Wikipedia. And the reason I bring up the Wikipedia thing, why it's so important, listen, not everybody's going to tune into our show every day. Some people will listen, some people won't. It depends on the day. So we've brought up the AI thing before, right? Or ChatGPT, where they're getting their information, right? They're drawing it from places like Wikipedia, places like Google. This is where they're getting their sources from. So as we're moving forward into this new world, man, if we don't clean up Wikipedia, ChatGPT is the next nightmare we're going to have to deal with too, and we're dealing with it.
Yeah. So again, it's the same thing where bad data in Wikipedia, it's coming from these activists that are radical, and they're skewing the data, and they're putting in tons of bad information into Wikipedia. The same thing can be applied not by activists, but by internal activists. So it's not the masses, it's not just random people, it's people that work there that are extreme left leaning. The only upside that I see is that a lot of Silicon Valley has been turning to the right. You talk about Mark Andreessen and Andreessen Horowitz. I mean, that's one of the biggest investment firms in the Silicon Valley. And they were fed up with the Democratic Biden-led insane policies, and they backed Trump. You're seeing the Peter Thiel group and the Thiel Fellowship and all of that. So where once was you'd be a pariah if you were a conservative in Silicon Valley, now you're seeing a whole bunch of leaders come out, and they are very influential. Andreessen Horowitz has huge pull within all of these AI systems because they're massive investors in it. They're the ones that would hold the line and make sure that this thing doesn't go off the rails into Wokeville. But we've seen it. We've seen it in action. You saw Grok put out some insane
Quite a
stuff.
few times, yeah.
And that's because of what the people are feeding it. They call it large language data models. They have to take in massive amounts of data, and they usually scrape it off the net. And what's on the net? What you tell me, like, what do you have on the internet? You have everything on the internet. It's insane. People have posted flat earther videos. There's more flat earther videos on YouTube than, I ever would have met. I thought it would be like three guys with tinfoil hats, and, they would be made fun of. But there's hundreds of thousands of people that actually believe the earth is flat. I mean,
yeah, no. Listen, one of Joe Rogan's best BFFs is a flat earther, and there's nothing wrong with just having the conversation.
Who's that? Which guy is that?
I can't remember who it is, but he's been a very prominent guest on his show quite a few times, and it's sort of enjoyable watching it, because it's enjoyable watching when something you're doing gets turned on you and you can't really fight back because you've gone so off the rails in some ways that it's like you're arguing with yourself, and it's sort of enjoyable to watch. I want to move on though a little bit to there's this, I believe in prayer. I know you believe in prayer. I believe prayer works. You have Jen Psaki coming out yesterday, former White House spokesperson. And my mother is the only person that pointed this out to me, by the way. MSNBC has to change their name, right? So they're changing it to MS Now. And my mother called me and she said to me, MS is for multiple sclerosis. Did they not know this? And I thought, oh, my mother actually, who's a brilliant woman, is it's sort of an odd name with the MS part. And the only reason I bring that up is because Jen Psaki, who works for MS Now, prayer is not freaking enough. Prayer does not end school shootings. Prayer does not make parents feel safe sending their kids to school. Prayer does not bring these kids back. Enough with the thoughts and prayers. Now, J.D. Vance writes, we pray because of our hearts are broken. We pray because we know God listens. We pray because we know that God works in mysterious ways and can inspire us to further action. Why do you feel the need to attack other people for praying when kids were just killed praying? So you're asking for pushback. J.D. Vance is pushing back. Trump has put together a group of people that are pushing back.
Yeah, the fact that they would come out and knock prayer on the day that a whole bunch of little children were murdered while praying is unconscionable. I mean, there's no hope for these people. They're from blaming it on guns and not the SSRIs and the trans kid that's all hopped up on meds. They won't even say that he's trans. I mean, you see it, his information, his video that he put out. The guy's clearly trans. He's gone through the name change, and his parents were involved in that. And he's an obvious lunatic. And these people are making fun of the fact that people are praying when they're grieving.
It's tripling and doubling down. And then she writes, when kids are getting shot in their pews at a Catholic school mass, and your crime plan is to have National Guard put mulch down around DC, maybe you rethink your strategy. And I'm like thinking, yeah, the president's strategy is actually working in DC. And if it came to, as we brought up yesterday, the National Guard being deployed at schools, or, obviously people that served this country or retired police officers, all of us would be in favor of that. We have so much money to pay for these things. It's not a joke. And yes, I know we're trillions in debt, but Minnesota had a $17 billion surplus, I believe it was, or some crazy amount of a surplus. And I probably am getting that number off, but there's tons of money to pay for these things. And they really have no ideas right now. They have no ideas, and they keep on doubling down on this insanity because most of us, let's be honest, men, most of us think the same way when it comes to the trans stuff. It really is what shook up when you talk about the silicone people. The DEI stuff is what made them leave. With Elon, it was his son getting mutilated. This issue is not a winning issue. And they're really deciding this is where they're going to go. This is the hill they're going to die on. Problem is, others are dying because they're dying on that hill.
Well, there's a takeaway for this is that Catholic schools, Christian schools, religious institutions need to hire their own security. That's the bottom line. The place of worship that we go to has private security, decked out in military gear. Anyone who comes, anywhere near there, these guys are scrutinizing them. As far as them doubling down, you had Bill de Blasio come out yesterday. He's the former mayor of New York, the guy who ruined New York, the guy who let all of the criminals out of jail and turned New York from a shining example of what a modern city could be into a hellhole. He came out and said every Democrat running for office should be more like MEND. So, okay, great. Double down on that. MS Now, which is the MSNBC, which is the most woke television program online. And I've been saying this for a long time. If we ban the advertisement of pharmaceutical sales on TV, which every other country besides for, I think, New Zealand bans, you're not allowed to advertise drugs on TV, which sounds like a no-brainer, but for some reason in this country we do it. That company would be out of business. MSNBC, CNN, they would all fold, and they're skewed news because they are funded by the same pharmaceutical companies that they're supposed to be reporting on. So obviously they skew the news in favor of them all the time. Same reason that Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Times. He just didn't want them to talk smack about him anymore. So he bought it. They haven't had a bad publication about him since he bought it. So MS Now is derived from, this is the new name for MSNBC, My Source News Opinion World. So MSNOW. And the ridicule on social media on X is coming out where people are calling it majorly skewed news overly woke.
Or as my mother thought, multiple sclerosis, but
great.
That was her reference, and it's not a knock on people, obviously, with multiple sclerosis, but you would have thought they would have thought about that before they branded themselves with that name. Just a thought.
Yeah, my favorite is most surely no one watching. So that is the most accurate one. Talking about MS, I actually raised a whole bunch of money for them. We did a bike ride. I rode 100 miles for MS a couple of years ago and raised a whole bunch of money for them. It's a great organization. The only thing that I would hold out against them was they weren't the best at providing us with the route. We had to bike 100 miles and we were on the side of a highway part of the time with almost no protection, with 18-wheelers going by at 150 miles an hour.
Hey, listen, luxury problems. Okay,
you were problems. Hey,
you were riding for people that can't ride. Okay, I'm sorry they gave you. I'm sorry they gave you a bad route. The last thing I really want to talk about though is Trump's is going to have a real issue with this Russia thing. And I don't know what you do as Putin is blasting ballistic missiles into Kiev and killing people. I don't know what, at a certain point, you either wash your hands of the situation or you arm the Ukraine up as much as possible. It's one or the other. Putin does not want a deal. He wants Russia. He wants the whole Ukraine. I mean, let's be honest. That's what he wants. So you either allow that or you give them as much arms as humanly possible.
I think that this is going to end with Trump making a deal with Putin that says, whatever you do, no nukes. Keep the nukes out of it. And we're going to continue to supply Ukraine with some defensive and offensive weapons, but mostly defensive weapons. And we hope you guys can get an off ramp. We tried. We're not able to get there. Call me when you're ready to take the off ramp. And it's just been reported yesterday that Kiev built their own missile that is able to fly deep into Russia. So these are the types of missiles that they've been asking the US and the Europeans for, and America was afraid of giving it to them because it would surely escalate the war. But now that they're domestically producing them, we can't tell them what to do with what they produce domestically. So they're going to start inflicting. I think they're producing 50 of these a month, and they're trying to ramp up to like 400. They are going to take out the Russian oil machine, which is what funds the war. And when that happens,
well, they're already running low, by the way. They actually, at their stations, I mean, if
prices are up 40% in Russia for gasoline. They're going to continue inflicting damage on the Russians. The Russians will continue taking territory and inflicting damage on the Ukrainians. There is no end in sight, but we just hope it doesn't escalate into a nuclear war. And let's see what happens. Look, the one thing you cannot deny is that Trump gave it a real good effort to end that war. He really tried. He was nice to Putin. He did all the right things to try to get this guy to take the off ramp, which is in stark contrast to what the Biden administration did. And it didn't work. It doesn't look like it's working. And that's fine. It's our job to try. And he tried on behalf of the American people, and he tried on behalf of the European people, and especially on behalf of the Ukrainians. And it doesn't look like it's going anywhere. We're going to put sanctions on them. They'll continue to sell the Europeans weapons that they could give to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are domestically producing weapons that they could use. Okay, just let it play out.
Well said. And I want to just jump back to the beginning and say this. We have to watch our rhetoric too. And there was a horrific school shooting yesterday committed by a person that, came out and said that they were just tired of this. They were so angry that they allowed themselves to be indoctrinated by the trans stuff. I mean, this is from Robert, the trans person, who is just obviously the mind was not functioning in any which way other than suicidal and homicidal. That was pretty much the two thoughts running through the brain. This is where Republicans often lose the culture war because they don't know how to speak about the culture war very well. You don't rail against people that are mentally ill. You just do not do it. And I am for offering them, MEND, as much mental health services as humanly possible. Very grateful that Bobby Kennedy is there right now because I know his heart will always be in the right place. But I don't want there to be terror against these people. I don't want harm caused to these people. I want nothing but help for these people because they have been used as lab experiments and guinea pigs by the left. No different than what Mengele did. No different than what the Freeman did with the lobotomies. Freeman, not Friedman. There's no difference. So we have to treat these people with cures, not hate and nothing like that. That's just my humble opinion.
Yeah, I actually feel bad for a lot of these trans kids. I don't think it's their fault. I think it's the adults that have led them astray, that have not done right by them. And a lot of them are really miserable because the rhetoric and the ideas that they've been told hasn't done anything to improve their mental state. So they're unhappy. They think they're in the wrong body, or they're convinced by someone else that they're, they might be gay or they might be trans, or they look around and they see how much attention some of these trans
Yeah.
kids are getting. And that is a lot of it. It's a social contagion, as Abigail Schreier calls it. And that is, you see it happening in clusters and not evenly across the nation, right? So we talked about that.
By the way, just because you talk about something, it doesn't mean you can't talk about it again. Like I always say this story where I felt like I was writing too many of the same pieces. And Ben Stein said to me, "What do you think George Will's been doing for 70 years?" I think, I know somebody that only writes about immigration for The Hill. That's all he writes about is immigration. That's his wheelhouse. Sometimes you have to talk about the same things over and over again because that's how important those issues are.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, back to these trans kids. My heart breaks for them. They were led astray. They were convinced that if they took some sort of action like gender mutilation surgery, it's going to help them. And then it doesn't. And years later, you have a lot of these detransitioners that have come out. And Google it, detransitioners. These are kids that went through the surgery and then they hit 23, 24 years old and they realize that they were lied to. This has not helped them. They were just going through a phase and they can't get back to where they were because they were put on puberty blockers. They were put on hormones for the opposite sex and they had parts of their bodies chopped off. And they're really like, those are the ones my heart breaks for the most because they woke up, they realized that was just a little weird phase that they went through. And that's not really what they needed at the time. They needed a hug. They needed someone to say, "Hey, I know you're not feeling good right now and it's okay." Kids have to know how to live with hardship and strife. That's how you become resilient. I had my kid, digging up the yard the other day and planting flowers. Like, that's what they do. And you know how rewarding it is for them? When he was done, he kept on looking back. He brought me out there to show me what he had done. And he was so prideful. This is like, that's what kids need. They don't need, "Oh, you're not feeling well? Here's a drug. You're not feeling well? Here's another drug. Let's cut off a part of your body." That's not what children need. I can't even believe that we have to explain this.
No,
I
no,
know
no,
everybody
no.
gets
But
it, but it's just,
I know this is. I mean, it's insane. You're right. It's insane that this is where the conversation has led to, not by us. And this is where we're at. I agree with you 100%. This is the most like you've brought up. And I say this: if people brought this up before Trump, 2014, when everybody was only remember, I always say this to people, and I've brought this up to you. Look at the newspapers before Trump got elected. Everybody was whining about Scientology, modified foods, the Kardashians. Everything was front page news. All of a sudden, Trump gets elected, man, none of it mattered anymore, which always meant to me that it never mattered in the first place, right? And the fact that we have to talk about this stuff is insane, is absolutely insane. But we care about children and we care about America, so we must talk about it. So there you are.
Great. That's enough of that. Oh my God, I'm so exhausted from this trans stuff.
I just want to pray for the families. I want to pray for everybody that's struggling, that got shot yesterday. Not, I think we always lose sight of the fact that so many people, the rest of their lives, are forever harmed by this moment in time, by this horrific moment in time. These children will never be the same. Their families will never be the same. Nobody will ever be the same. And I hate when the first thing that people come out and say is ban guns. And that's your answer to these families is ban guns. And that's a sickness too. Okay. Any blue slips for me today for final stories?
No, I think that was it. I want to remind everybody, check out Robbie's Substack. This guy, check him out on X. He's very influential and he's done some amazing work. So that's my plug for the day.
Yes, there you are. And I want to thank everybody that's been listening and downloading, and remind everybody, helps those 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts. Follow us on Substack, Daily Cheat Sheet, YouTube at The Daily Cheat Sheet, Rumble at The Daily Cheat Sheet, Instagram at The Daily Cheat Sheet, X at TD Cheat Sheet, on Truth, of course. And that's where you can find us. Like us, comment. And on that note, I want to wish everybody a good morning, afternoon, and night world, wherever you are.